Hi there, Director of Photography Alec Watson. Today we're working on really long exposures. There is something I love about getting up early in the morning and heading out and just shooting for enjoyment. It doesn't always have to be commercial. One of the things that I do for enjoyment, I love shooting, I don't know what I would call ruins, and so things like old churches or really old buildings. Just down the road from me, we've got these old piles. They're about 100 years old. They've been sitting out there from an old pier when this area used to be a coal mine. I love shooting these. And with the water, I love shooting really long exposure. It's fun to do because you have no idea what it's gonna look like. I'm gonna use a filter to do this. Brand name of this one happens to be Zombie. It's like zombie spelt wrong. Not particularly expensive. I'll throw a link that I picked it up off Amazon. It's an ND filter. It's a 10 stop, meaning like I really can't, well, I can kinda barely see through it, but it's pretty much dark. Now you're gonna see all sorts of reviews on the internet about these filters and talking about ND filters being, you know, neutral and not coloring things. The reality is though that an ND filter that's, you know, at 10 stops, it's always gonna color things in some direction. I'm not that worried about it. It's fairly fixable in post, we'll go over that. And I actually like the effect. This one tends to make things a little overly cool. When the exposures get really long, I mean, if you think about, I use pool tables a lot as an example. When you're shooting that cue ball close to the other ball, really easy to shoot. When you're going for that really long shot across the table, any slight error, man, you miss by a mile. And I think that happens with these really strong ND filters. If they're a little bit off color temperature, when you're going 10 stops, that takes it a long way. To put this on, I want to take off my existing filter. You don't want to put a filter stack on your camera, and the reason we don't want to do that is because as that stacks out further, it's going to vignette the edges. Let's talk about what we're shooting. I've got my camera locked down on tripod. I've got it leveled with a bubble level on here. I've also got a level built into the camera. I recommend if you don't have either, get one of the little bubble levels that you can put on top of your camera. It's one of those things, again, you can fix it in post, but if you want your whole picture, because when you rotate, you lose some picture, get it level in the first place. Now, as far as, for me, shooting water, kind of this up-down axis, I don't generally like splitting the image in half. When you split the image in half, kind of breaks into two hemispheres, not as interesting to me. Is the sky interesting? Is the water interesting? Well, when I move the horizon way up high in this shot, I don't know, it feels like too much water for me. So we'll move slightly the other way, and I drop my horizon in, for me, just below halfway. For you, you do it any way you like. I just thought I'd explain my process on that one. It just happens to be what I like. We're looking for long exposures, so I'm gonna get my ISO as low as it wants to go. This camera, an A7R III, it shoots at ISO 100 as kind of its low spot. It can go lower, but I have noticed that things get a little weird when it goes lower. So ISO 100 is where I bottom that one out. I'm shooting in manual, by the way. Always want to shoot these long exposures in manual. I've got my meter set, f8. It's a 200th of a second to get this shot. We'll just go ahead and take a shot. I had a comment come in on another video when I was locked down and I was shooting macro, and I said to turn off image stabilization, or you could have vibration reduction, whichever your camera has. And Art N wrote in and said, hey Alec, I have read that the cameras know when they're on a tripod. And you know what my answer to this is? It's just like, yeah, you know what? Maybe they do at this point. And it seems like that should probably be figured out. But I'm out here, I'm getting a little cold. I want this shot to be great. It seems like I could make a mental note to self, go in and turn off image stabilization, and I 100% know that it's off. And that just makes more sense to me. Of course, I've been calling it image stabilization. It's steady shot on a Sony. Sorry, Sony. It looks good. The sky is not quite as interesting as I'd like. I will show you a post thing we can do to get a little more out of the sky. We'll close way down to f22 for a long exposure and see where we get to. At f22, that takes us to about a 30th of a second, which we're not gonna call exactly a long exposure, right? We'll take that shot and we'll run a comparison of these in post. I'm gonna zoom in, make sure this is 100% in focus before I put this filter on, because once I put this filter on, this camera is not going to be able to see very well, or if you're using like a camera with a mirror on it. Okay, we've got the filter on. This is going to become black. It's a 10-stop filter. If anybody's good at math, and every 3 clicks of my shutter speed is 1 stop, we're looking for 30 clicks. So at a 20th of a second, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 1, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. Actually, we capped out at a 30th of a second, but 30 was right on the money, 30 clicks. So we've got a 30-second exposure at f11. Now, remember I focused beforehand? When I look at this, this all looks a little fuzzy, and that's because on this camera it's in live view, and there's so much noise in the picture that it would actually be very difficult to focus at this point. So do not want to be touching focus. So we'll take a shot and step away from the camera, step away from the tripod, and let that run for its 30 seconds. I also have a trigger. Now, yeah, I could have triggered this and that would have caused less movement on the top, but honestly on a 30-second exposure that, I don't know, 25th of a second that I might have bumped that, not a big deal. We can test that. If I was being an engineer about it, I absolutely would have used this. Now we're going to use this to go up in exposure again. The longest exposure I could get at f11 was a 30th, and we'll go ahead and check out the exposure on that. And man, it looks pretty darned awesome. We're going to go for a really long exposure. We're going to take it up to 2 minutes. And in order to do that, I've got to go to bulb exposure. The Sony sometimes doesn't like to go to bulb exposure, and this is just for Sony people. This is a weirdness that I would change if I was at Sony. Hey, no to Sony. You have to be in single shot mode. Otherwise, you cannot get a bulb exposure on here. There we go, bulb. I'm gonna set my timer for 2 minutes. During this 2-minute exposure, the sun's come out, and that's gonna change my exposure. It's gonna possibly overexpose things a lot. Of course, shooting in RAW, the same as you should do. Now, when I set my exposure for this, I use the idea of ETR, exposed to the right, meaning that there's kind of a latitude of area, especially on kind of a gray day like this, of the dynamic range of the camera. The camera has a huge dynamic range, and the shot that I'm taking is not that huge a dynamic range. And so even though the meter might say like middle gray would be here, it gives me a lot of headroom. And so by exposing to the right, meaning I move to the right of my histogram, I push everything to the right of the histogram, that as long as that doesn't get burnt in, I actually get more detail in my image. So hopefully, we'll check out the histogram when this finishes, and as long as that's not burnt, we got the 2-minute image. Otherwise, I will be out here for another 2 minutes. Having a look at that in the blue channel, that image unfortunately got burnt with the sun coming out. So we will reduce the time back to 30 seconds at this point at f22, and we'll try that same shot again. We'll have a look and see how the exposure comes out. So here's my 30-second exposure, and here's my 2-minute exposure. And when you're shooting, it's hard to know which is going to be the right one when it comes to dynamic range, and which one's going to smooth out the water enough. And that's one of the things I love about this technique, is you never really know what you're going to get. It's so much fun. Highly recommend doing this. If you got something out of this video, please click like. In fact, I would love it if you subscribe, because if you subscribe and we grow this channel more, that gives me more opportunities to take the cameras around when I'm working on commercial shoots and film videos for you. Throw some stuff down in the comment section, things you like. I mean, I like hearing that, but honestly, throw questions down. If you want to know something, I am happy to answer your questions, and this is where some of the video ideas are coming from. I'll be working on some post-production on this one. If you want to catch what I'm doing in post, make sure you click the little blue bell, because that'll notify you that the post-production stuff's coming out. In the meantime, I'm gonna go warm up, and for you, I recommend doing this as a technique. So much fun. Get out there, shoot some photos, and make the world a better and more beautiful place.